All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Shubhali, and I've been in this space that I like to call the inner work for now about a decade. And over this decade, I have traversed the landscape, practicing as a coach, working as a therapy practitioner, and then moving into the broader domain of spirituality, working as a meditation teacher, spiritual guide, a yoga instructor. And over all of these years, there are certain core concepts that have in a way filtered through my own understanding, through my work with myself, my experiences, and the work with others. I also want to state that I do not hold any licenses. I have certificates because I have invested in my learning, but I have not found it important to maintain certification or licenses. And that's a completely different story. We can get into it at some other point in time. I want to take this opportunity to thank this platform, the South Asian Mental Health Consortium, to be open enough and to have the space. So let's begin and let's look at what we're hoping to cover through the next 90 odd minutes. We'll look at a few different ancient spiritual practices and see how they can possibly be applied to well-being. We'll look at a few prevailing theoretical approaches, the gaps in the prevailing theoretical approaches as far as the work around healing or resolving mental health issues goes. We'll look at these practices of grounding, resourcing, emotional resilience from the point of view of the ancient spiritual practices, specifically yoga and Tantra. And then we'll experience these practices as well. And finally, I will share with you all the therapeutic approach that I use. The reason I've put alternative in brackets is because it's questionable, right? Like, what really is alternative? Before we start, I want to share a few disclaimers to the presentation. Number one, it is beyond the scope of our session to go really into the finer nuances. And so the entire presentation will hopefully give us a broad overview. The intention at my end is not to find faults, but hopefully to be able to find possible ways to fill in some of the missing gaps that currently we see in the mental health space. Then the orientation. The orientation of this presentation is not the atypical research-based orientation. And I would like to close this gap, close this loop at the end of my presentation. What I mean by it does not have a typical research-based orientation. There is everything that I share has studies done on it, there is research, all of that is there. Yet my orientation with the presentation is not typical research-based. And finally, I'm going to be asking certain questions of you. You might see certain weird lines and curves on the screen, and I might ask you, what do you think about it? And my hope is that you'll play along and you'll participate. All right. Okay, so let's start off. And to start off with, the very first question, all of us, you, me, everybody who's here right now in this session, why at all are you here in this field? What is your why to be in this field? Please feel free to drop it in the chat. Why are you here in this field at all?
Hi there. It seems like we might not be able to actually share in the chat with everyone. It's just either to you directly, or which we can do to you directly if you prefer. But
that's fine. Like yeah, that's fine. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
I can just read out whatever people share. Why are you here in this field? Broadly in this field of mental health. I will skip the names because I don't know if everybody will be comfortable with the names. I'm just going to read out what they're saying. To further bridge the gap in the care I provide, I'm just going to open this chat box up. Yeah. bridge the gap in the care I provide clients and wisdom we have from our culture, integration of these, healing. I want to present queer Indian women as therapists to help people access long-lasting healing from within. And connect multiple generations. So all of these things that you're saying, right, to provide healing, to provide wisdom, to connect multiple gaps, to connect the multiple generation gaps, to elevate consciousness, psychoeducation. Why? Like, why do you want to do all of this? What is there? What is existing that you want to do all of this? Compassion and seeing others as myself. There's a generational gap and loss of culture. This causes, so there is some conflict, okay? So there's some conflict that you want to address. What else? What else is it that you want to address? So they say that they've noticed the loss of why we do things causes conflict. Now, if I kind of look at what you are saying really here, whether it is the conflict, it is the gap in generations, it is providing wisdom, providing healing, in a way, what you're saying is that there is some kind of suffering that exists, right? There is some form of suffering. You can call it pain, you can call it conflict, you can call it anxiety, you can call it whatever you want to call it, some form of suffering. And when you say you're wanting to understand, you're wanting to provide healing wisdom, you're saying that from some form of, whatever form of suffering exists, you want to move towards some form of happiness. Yeah, some form of happiness, contentment, balance, healing. This is broadly what we're wanting to do. Now, humor me once again, please, and share what causes this suffering? Why does this suffering really happen? Disconnection from ourselves and relationships, alienation from others like us, experiences of rejection, confusion, discrimination based on an innate part of ourselves, communication breakdown, eventual isolation. Lack of strategies to connect with eternal principles and happiness within, need for control when sometimes we don't have much, injuries in relationships. So in a way, can I say all of these different things that you're saying finally lead to an inability or a difficulty in being able to work with emotions? You know, there can be whatever disconnection in the outside, there can be whatever conflict in the outside, there can be whatever miscommunication in the outside. But if I know how to work with what these outside events cause within me, then I'll be okay. However, since I'm not able to work with the emotions inside, there is difficulty to work with emotions, there is suffering. And these difficulties in emotions often present themselves as behavioral issues. Yeah. When these difficulties with emotions, with working with emotions, not difficulties with emotions, the difficulty of working with emotions, when it begins to present itself as behavioral issues, what we start doing is we start labeling them and start saying, okay, this particular set, anxiety disorders, that particular set, bipolar, their borderline personality disorder, then here ADHD, on the other side, eating disorders, one side PTSD, on the other side depression. And so then we start grouping these manifestations, the behavioral manifestations, into different buckets. There's nothing wrong with bringing a group of behaviors and putting them under a heading or a terminology. the problem happens when we bring them together, put them into a heading, and then forget that the real reason is the same. It's the low capacity to work with emotions. When we forget this and focus on this, this is the whole picture. From this whole picture, we go into the nuances, so to say, and then we think that this nuance, this one nuance is the whole picture. And when we do that, there is a danger of falling into the ditch because we forget what Aristotle had taught us once, which is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Let's see what that really can look like, okay? Tell me, what do you see on the screen? What do you think? Whatever you're seeing, what do you think it is? Again, put it in the chat. What do you think it is? Ties. So somebody's seeing them as ties. There are probably 5 ties. Towers, 5 towers. Pillars. Strands of hair. Yeah. Okay. So can be many different things depending on my mood at the moment. Yeah. Many different things depending on my mood at the moment. Okay. What about this? What do you think this is? Foundation, tabletop, unity, frisbee. Okay. And what about this? What do you think this is? Table. Okay. Or stool. Anyone else? Anyone else seeing anything besides a table or a stool? Nobody is typing in. And so then I'm going to assume that everybody is then looking at this image and saying, this is either a table or a stool, depending on the height. When I showed you this, different people said different things. When I showed you this, different people said different things. But when this, the first image and the second image, when they came together, everybody saw the same thing. It's either a table or a stool, depending on the height. And this is what I mean when I say that when we get into the nuances, it's good to get into the nuances, but the danger with getting into the nuances is that then we will either stay with the tie, or we'll stay with the pillar, or we'll stay with the, for me, I never thought of a tie or a pillar. I thought it might be a baseball bat. Yeah. So we'll stay with those and we'll never see that actually it's a table. So Preet is asking everybody if you can try to chat with everybody. Okay. Humor me once again. All right. So this was where we said whole. The whole is greater than the sum of the different parts. This is where we said this. And from here, we're going to now move towards what ancient philosophy says. And for that, again, humor me a little. What do you think this is? Scribbles. What else could it possibly be? doodle, scribble, doodle. What about this? Art. Art. So from the scribble or doodle, we went into art. And now what is this? Pathway. Threads, kites. Routes to destinations. And now what is this? Connections. Paths. What I now also want you all to do is try and see what happens for the mind. What's happening in your interior, what's happening to your thought process, where first you see these three short lines, segments of lines, then you see this, then you see this, and then you see this. What is the process that's happening inside? From where do you go to where? What's really happening within the mind of yours? Trying to make sense and meaning. And if I pick up what has been shared right now, which is trying to make sense and meaning, then in a way I can say that I understand the least here. This I understand somewhat, it seems an extension, but I'm still not sure. Then this starts making some story sense, and this brings in clarity along with it. Yeah? This is why the great yogis of the ancient times said that the view, to be able to see the view, is very important. Where is it that I'm going? What is my path? And not just any path, but a clearly defined path. So when I'm here, this is still a little confusing to my mind. But from here, when I come here, I see where I want to go. I see the clearly laid down paths. Yeah. So the view and the path are both extremely important. In different philosophies, the views are slightly different, but more or less similar. Similarly, depending on the kind of view, the paths are slightly different, more or less similar. For us, for our purposes for today, we've laid out a very broad and simple path. We've said suffering to happiness. Now, in my experience, what we tend to do in today's day and age is we don't look at suffering as suffering to happiness path. We look at the specific problem, which in the DSM world we call a disorder. And we say, this disorder is the problem that needs to be fixed. If it gets fixed, great. But very soon, another problem raises its head. And most of the times it doesn't even get fixed because it was never the problem to be fixed to begin with. It was a manifestation of the problem. But in the attempt of just solving the problem in front of us, what we forget to see is that it is not that problem. This is the nature of life. And life doesn't go in a sine curve. Life goes wherever it pleases. It goes left, right, forward, backward, wherever it wants to go. At times it goes in circles. Right? And so when we focus on one particular issue, for now, let's call it disorder. If we focus on one disorder, it's like that disorder is actually a stone on the path or a thorn on the path. And we feel as if it's this biggest mountain to climb. It's only when we zoom out, and you can zoom out only if you want to see the view. So you zoom out and you see the view and you realize, okay, this entire path is laid out. There are various stones, big rocks, small rocks, thorns. But now that I can see the path, I can start figuring out how I want to walk on the path. Yeah. Now let's try and bring these metaphors into some semblance through slightly tangible words. And here are what I believe some possible gaps in the prevailing theories to resolving mental health issues. It seems like many a times we zoom in too much and then we forget that there's this whole person. The person becomes just their problem. And then we keep going deeper and deeper into that problem, which is fine. Again, it's fine as long as we're able to zoom out back, which doesn't tend to happen. As we zoom in, we start being reductive. The third point, I'd like to quote, or not quote, but share something that I heard Bessel van der Kolk say. And Bessel van der Kolk is the author of The Body Keeps Score. I'm assuming everybody might be familiar with the book, or at least heard of the book. And I mean it with, I don't intend disrespect for anybody. I'm sharing something I heard him say, and I thought it kind of made sense. Here's what he said. He said, the quality of clinicians being churned out today is much lower than the quality when I was a student in the school. And he said, in his understanding, he said the reason is that training today is so heavily focused on the DSM that the clinician sitting on this side of the table looks at the DSM, looks at the patient, looks at the DSM, looks at the patient, finds the concept, and then the concept is the king. And in the process, they forget that the person is actually way beyond that concept. Yeah. Once you've said this is the concept, then this concept is also the problem, which is why it's a disorder. And then as you start fixing the problem, unknowingly, unwittingly, what we do is we reinforce the story of the person in front of us, the story that says, I am a problem, I need fixing, there is something wrong with me. Last but not the least is the dilemmas of labeling. The first and foremost dilemma, to tell or not to tell. As the clinician, therapist, psychologist, whatever role you're playing broadly as a healer, whether or not you tell, once you're using this model of diagnosis, it will, if not consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, play into how you see and perceive the person in front of you. So that's dilemma one. Then let's say you do tell the person. Unknowingly, unwittingly, in that, more often than not, there is a propagation of the stigmatization. One that. Second, again, you reiterate the problem, you reiterate the fact that I am the problem. Reiterate that story. And if you're able to fix the problem for this person, great. But in many cases, the problem is not fixed because, again, it was never the problem to begin with. And so the new story that the person starts forming, or again starts reiterating, I am unfixable. And then one other trend that I see is if I'm diagnosed with a certain thing, then it starts becoming, in a way, a protector for me, where I say, yes, of course, I'll be like this because I have a problem. All of this is not to minimize the suffering. We've already said suffering is there. We want to resolve suffering. That's why we are here. What we're trying to do here, or at least what I'm trying to do here, is try and tease out where really the suffering is. And are we even seeing the suffering? Okay, so now this then brings me, since we've been talking about these possible gaps, this brings me to the word disorder. And from here, we start looking at how most of the DSM world looks at mental issues and how some ancient philosophies look at mental issues. When you see the word disorder, like anything else, anything you read, watch, hear, do, there is always an underlying assumption, an underlying implication. So when you see the word disorder, even though nothing else is said, there is an underlying assumption that something is out of order, which means something is not normal, meaning something must be abnormal. None of this is said, but all of this starts becoming the underlying implications. Disorders versus now what Patanjali says. Patanjali is to yoga what Freud is to psychoanalysis. And here's what Patanjali says about yoga. He says, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The word yoga in and of itself means union. We'll touch upon it in a bit. But here he's saying that this philosophy of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. Chitta means consciousness or the mind. Vritti means fluctuations. Nirodha means stops. So he's saying that yoga stops fluctuations of the mind. When you read this sentence, you see nowhere does it say yoga stops dysfunctional fluctuations of the mind. It doesn't say yoga stops abnormality of the mind. It says yoga stops fluctuations of the mind as if it's a fact that there are fluctuations in the mind. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing out of order. This is the function of a part of the mind. Yeah. And so we see right from here, the perception is so different. And what is healing if not a shift in the perception? So now let's see what Patanjali further talks and says about yoga. And let's clarify that when I use the term yoga, yoga is beyond asanas. Normally, when most people hear the term yoga, they think of the yoga poses. However, in the Yoga Sutras that Patanjali wrote, only 3 of the 196 sutras were there where he directly spoke about asanas or the poses. And even in those 3, he didn't say that the asana is about flexibility or the asana is about doing the toughest pose. He said an asana is an asana when it is sthira sukham asana, stable, comfortable pose. The idea behind this being that everything else, all emotions, all stuck thoughts, beliefs reside in the body. Again, if you've heard of body keeps the score or when body says no, any of these body-based understanding studies, you would know that the body holds everything else. And so the idea behind sthira sukhamasana, being able to hold a stable, comfortable pose, was that if you're able to do it with the body, if you're able to increase the capacity of the body to tolerate discomfort, you're automatically increasing your capacity to tolerate heavy emotions. And then, of course, it goes into much more detail of the different chakras, of the different energy points and opening up of those things. All of those things are further details into it. But this is the crux of it, that you practice the asana in order to reach the eventual goal of yoga, and the eventual goal of yoga is union. Union of what? Before we can understand union of what, let's understand the concept of conceptual and non-conceptual. Let's say, for example, a scientist attaches electrodes to a person's head, and then the brain lights up in the scan. Now, this researcher will be able to tell you when person A thinks B thought, X part of the brain lights up. And also, this is also slightly deduced because person A will have to say that I thought B thought. Let's say person says, I thought a happy thought. Great, the researcher will be immediately able to tell you when this person is happy, this part of the brain lights up. And then when they do enough research, they're able to say in human beings, when human beings are happy, this part lights up. But here's what nobody can tell you. The person cannot tell the researcher exactly what this happiness is made of. They can say, I felt happy, but they can never exactly show what the happiness is made of. Forget showing it to the researcher. They themselves cannot see what this happiness is made of. They can see the manifestation of the happiness. But this happiness that cannot be shown, that cannot be seen, is a felt sense. It is beyond concepts. It can be spoken about through concepts. But in and of itself, it lies in the domain of non-conceptual, something that you cannot talk about, that you cannot explain, you can only feel into. And so when we say yoga is union, they say from conceptual, non-conceptual, let me just say yoga is the union of conceptual and the non-conceptual. When you can see through the felt sense, the non-conceptual, that means you are now in union. In other words, many of you may have heard sentences like Atma ka Paramatma se milan. Of the individual soul, the union of the individual soul with the universal soul. The union of the man with the God. The union of the self with everything else, with the cosmos. All of those things are basically saying that when our concepts, when we are able to go beyond our concepts, that's when we'll be able to see the reality. Again, going to the disclaimer, it is beyond the scope of this session to be able to really go into the depths of what this union, what this non-conceptual really is. In any case, non-conceptual cannot be explained, cannot be spoken about. You can point to the non-conceptual through concepts, which is what I tried to do right now. But that's all you can do. The non-conceptual has to be felt and experienced. So this is the core of yoga. Now, from here, Patanjali gave us Ashtanga yoga. Ashtang is Asht and Ang, 8 limbs. So he gave us 8 limbs, and there is a reason he doesn't call it steps, even though there is a progression, but at the same time, they all also need to come together. That's why it has 8 limbs. And here are the 8 limbs that Patanjali gives in the Yoga Sutras, starting from restraining from certain things, observing certain other things, working with the body through the asanas, the postures, working with the body through the breath, withdrawing from the senses, concentrating the mind, meditating, and then finally, all of the above 7 leading to pure contemplation. This pure contemplation is the pure space of the non-conceptual. And when you see from 1 to 8, it goes from, in a way, one can say gross, what is the most conceptual, to the most subtle, the most non-conceptual. You can also look at these 8 divisions as the first 2 are to do with the mind, the mental models that you form. The next 2 are to do with the body, the working with the body. The 5th is to do with emotions. And according to the classical yoga view, the work with emotions is to withdraw from the senses, which is to not engage with the emotions. And then the last 3 is the work with the beyond, the work with the non-conceptual through more concept-based concentration. You can still think of a concept-based. And then from there, going subtler and subtler, finally into pure contemplation. At this point, if there are any questions or thoughts, I would love to take them up. At this point, another, for say about 2 to 5 minutes, and then we'll move on. Thank you, Christopher. I'll wait for a few more, maybe a half a minute, in case there are any questions. Otherwise, we'll move on. How does this compare to mindfulness? What I might say could be a little controversial, but I would say that a lot of mindfulness has a lot of characteristics of reductiveness, because mindfulness is a part of the entire deal. You know, it's like you have a meal, and in the meal there is a part for all the macronutrients and a part for all the micronutrients, and you say, no, I just want this particular micronutrient, and I'll live my life with this. Yeah. And it's not that that micronutrient is not helpful. Mindfulness is helpful, but it misses the entire picture. That's what I would say. One part was picked up and transplanted. Yeah. What are your thoughts? How do we bring the Western scientific world to these understandings with so many programs of research digging holes shallowly without reaching water? Yeah, that's a question I guess we all need to carry and hold, and especially for those of us who are into the space of research, into the space of typical research. That's not my area, and so I'm not sure of the answer to that. It is definitely a question for me to hold. My action to that is research within, and I'll again close the loop with that to the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's move on from here.
I want to share something just related to this. Like, I find myself quite distraught at the fact that mindfulness has been transplanted, but there's not much thought behind it. It's just sort of like, and we all do this thing, and there are meta-analyses, and let's go for it. So thank you so much for sharing your insights too.
Thank you. Thank you. And at the same time, it seems, Diksha, just to sort of go on with what you're saying, it also seems something is going right now, something is going right, quote unquote, that people like you and other people here are waking up to the fact that let's question what this really is and what is behind this and where are we bringing this from. So the fact that the questions are coming up means something is going right somewhere. Yeah.
But okay. The issue that I see is that most of the teachers that I've encountered in the US you do a yoga teacher training for 200 hours and suddenly you can teach yoga and its principles to everybody. I don't know that I buy that, but that's how it is. So it's a little complicated.
I agree, absolutely. Yeah, those are the seeming dualities that I guess are for us to hold until we see beyond. Okay, so we move beyond from this, and in continuation, Tantra. So this was the classic yoga view. In Tantra has a slightly different perspective of emotions in specific, while classic yoga says pratyahara, withdraw from the senses, go away from the emotions. Tantra instead believes that most human suffering actually arises from the mistaken concept of this idea of separation. So Tantra says that actually when you go away, when you go back and hide from these emotions is when the suffering arises. And so Tantra says that instead of pratyahara, instead of withdrawing from the senses, it is important that we celebrate all the senses in the most mundane of lives. And according to Tantra, so both yoga, Tantra are both looking towards the same goal, of union, of what we'll next come to, the non-duality, understanding and the experience of non-duality. Except that yoga says, pratyahara, go away from the senses. Tantra says, go into the senses, go into the emotions. In fact, in Tantra, emotions are called rasas. Ras means juice. So Tantra says that emotions are the juice of life. Now, when Tantra says go into the emotion, what they're saying is be in the emotion the way you'd be in rain. So get wet in the emotion, neither go to the desert into the drought, nor go into the ocean and drown. Be in the rain, be replenished, be refreshed in the rain. Feel into the rain, enjoy the rain, celebrate the senses. That's Tantra's view. In fact, there are people that say that, and that once you reach advanced levels of yoga, then you begin to practice Tantra. So starting yoga from saying pratyahara, withdrawal from senses, advanced yoga, you bring in the senses. Again, the idea behind it being moving towards non-duality, which says it's neither nor. It cannot be pratyahara and it cannot be drowning in. It's neither this nor that, and not also this or that. And now this understanding of non-duality can be a little confusing. So it says non-duality is not neither this nor that. And non-duality is also not this or that. Since it is not this or that, it cannot be neither this or that. So then what is non-duality? The very term non-duality is in a way saying whole, all, same. No separation, no distinction, no other. And again, this is where we go into the non-conceptuality. Unless there is a slight taste of non-conceptuality experienced, it is really difficult to be able to grasp it. I will request if anyone has their mic on to please mute yourself. There is background noise. Thank you. So when we go into this non-duality and we say not separate, not distinct, not other, and we say everything is the same, it's in a way saying, we had said in the beginning, suffering to happiness is the path. Non-duality is saying everything is the same, so suffering is happiness, happiness is suffering. And to the cognitive mind, that's a little jarring. And somebody who's probably suffering right now, it's not just jarring, it can also be, it can evoke certain things. Right? Because if you're suffering, it's not happiness. But when you look at this view, what it tells you is that as you're suffering, you're wanting happiness and leave away suffering. Once you get the happiness, then remember the initial line of life, of what happens in life. It's up and down and round and left and right and everywhere. So you get happiness and then sooner or later it will move. It's not it will go somewhere, it will move. And the moment it moves, you again suffer. So whatever caused happiness, that itself then becomes suffering. And then that suffering will again transform into happiness because you'll work through that suffering and then come to happiness. And then happiness again goes back to suffering. And so it can seem as if, okay, so then what do I do? It's a vicious cycle, it's a trap. That's where Buddha comes in. And he talks about a few core concepts. We're going to touch upon one, which is attachment. He says that the root of it all is attachment, and attachment happens because of ignorance. Ignorance is a different topic. For now, let's stay at attachment. So if the root of it is attachment, what does that mean? What does that look like? Attachment, he says, is nothing but craving. The reason or aversion is in bracket is because aversion is also craving. Craving is to want something. Aversion is craving to not want something. So aversion is a form of craving. Yeah. When we love somebody, if we were to just love them, there would be no other issues. But what happens is that when we love ignorantly, remember Buddha says attachment and attachment happens because of ignorance. Since there is ignorance, we get attached. The moment we get attached, then we crave to want this person here forever in this particular fashion, or want this person here forever, not in this particular fashion. And both ways, we suffer. Then Buddha goes on further to say that there is also a way out of it. And the core of the way out is building the capacity for being equanimous. Equanimity is understood, interpreted, and defined in slightly different ways. How I'm going to define it here is equanimity is seeing what is as is and being with what is as is. Both are important. You see what is as is and be with it as is. And this is where we distinguish between equanimity, apathy, and bypassing. There's this term of spiritual bypassing, and you'll know what it means as I talk further. First, let's look at apathy. Let's say there's something that happens that hurts me. Apathy would be, oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I minimize. I might think, oh, I'm being equanimous, but actually I'm in apathy. I'm saying, I don't care. I minimize it. Scenario 2, something happens that's hurtful, and I say, oh, hurt, bliss, it's all the same. Happiness, suffering, all the same. Nothing is hurtful. It's all bliss. I'm in bliss. Spiritual bypassing. Equanimity is neither apathy nor bypass. Equanimity is to say, when it hurts, to say, oh, right now it hurts. In this moment, it hurts. It's painful. In this moment, there is anguish in me. There is anger in me. There is frustration in me. There is fear in me. That is what is the truth right now. It is as is. And I'm being with it as is. I'm not necessarily being okay. I don't feel okay about it. That is me being with it. Yes, eventually, as we keep practicing the different practices, skills, we will come to a place where we'll actually feel okay with it. But if I'm not feeling okay and I tell myself I'm okay, then that's again not equanimity. Equanimity is see whatever is as is, be with whatever is as is. Period. Yeah, I'm quickly going to check the chats. Seems like a powerful idea when everything is so polarized. Advaita Vedanta, yes, yes. So there is a bit of Advaita. Advaita Vedanta, Buddhist philosophy, Tantra, they all intersect. What a powerful way of being. We appreciate sharing without reservation. Yes, thank you, Disha. Okay, so enough words having spoken, and I was thinking let's enter into some practice. But before we enter into practice, again, I want to invite any questions or thoughts that are burning in your mind that you want to probably put out. And then those who would like to practice would be invited into the space for some practice. So I'll just wait for about a half a minute in case there are any questions. A huge barrier I feel we face is that religion, spirituality is often grouped. Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's also about the word spirituality, right? The word spirituality itself, it's like those underlying assumptions that we carry with every word. And it seems as if the word spirituality means something mysterious, mystical, and or something that's, not tangible, not practical, not scientific. And if we really question ourselves on mysterious and mystique, anything that we are not able to explain or understand, we say, oh, this is mysterious. So that's one bit. The second thing is that the word spirituality comes from the word spirit, which is basically the soul, the self. And my belief is any time that you're working with the self, you're in the space of spirituality. Okay, I will then, I'm assuming nobody has any burning questions or thoughts. Okay, so what would be nice or not nice, what might be helpful a little is if some of you feel comfortable and you can put your videos on and are wanting to practice, because that will sort of give me an understanding of what's happening for whom. So if anybody is interested in putting on videos, now would be the time to do. Again, I want to reiterate that this is not a space where I might be able to hold space per se. So check in with yourself and see if now is the time that you want to enter into practice, and then you can enter. Those who are coming into the practice, ensure that you're sitting. So wherever you're sitting, your feet should not be hanging in the air. Your feet should be able to touch the ground and firmly be able to support you as you touch the ground. Your back, keep it more or less straight. And once we begin, you don't need to look at the laptop because I would not want your body to be leaning like that. Yeah. So be supported by your own spine. If you have a back issue, let there be backrest. All right, great. Anyone who wears specs, you don't need your spectacles right now. You can remove your specs for the next 5-7 minutes. And if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. In case you're not comfortable closing your eyes, cast your eyes downwards at a 45-degree angle so that there is minimum visual distraction. And as you close your eyes, just notice how when the breath comes in, what movement happens in your body when the breath comes in. And then when it leaves, what movement happens. Just notice that in your own body. Now, as you breathe in the next breath, allow the breath to go slowly deep into the belly, almost as if reaching down towards the pelvic floor. And then gently exhale. And this gentle exhalation may also require some slowing down of the exhale. Now, bring your awareness to the contact between your seat. Your seat is made up of your hips, your sitting bones, your seat, and the seat that you're sitting on. So bring awareness to that contact. And see if you can feel your own weight through your sit bones. And sense into this contact, your own weight through your sit bones. And see how that feels in this moment. Now, holding on to this base contact, bring to your mind a person, a place, a thing, an animal, whatever that you really, really love. Just bring them to mind. And allow yourself to feel the love for them that you already have. Allow that feeling to be evoked. And then see if you can let your body respond to how you feel. Notice if you feel any sensation, any difference anywhere around the chest, anywhere around the belly, as you feel into the love. And maybe place a hand, the one that you usually use, place that hand gently on that part of the body, whether it's the chest or the belly, palm facing the part of the body. Just place a gentle hand there. And now you can even let go of the person or the place, the object of love. You can let go of them and bring all of your awareness to this area where you sense the love in the body. And as you take the next in-breath, allow it to expand in the body. You don't have to do anything, just allow it to expand, and you might sense the sensation going beyond just that area. And as you exhale, allow yourself to absorb. Inhale and let it expand. And exhale and let it absorb. And again, inhale and let it expand. Exhale, letting it absorb. With the next breath in, bring your awareness back to your seat. The contact between your seat and the seat below. And from here, we'll sort of change gears. And now I want you to bring to mind an event that upset you. On a scale of 0 to 10, the upset could be you felt sad, you felt angry, you felt frustrated, you felt jealous, anything that upset you. But if there were a scale of upsetness of 0 to 10, 0 being not at all, 10 being absolutely, let this be an event that was probably between a 5 and a 7, maybe 5 and an 8. And if you can't think of a particular event, then maybe bring to mind the emotion that you struggle with the most. And again, let it only be there between a scale of 5 to 8. And notice what happens in your body now. For me, even when I talk about, even as I share this with you, I start feeling a contraction somewhere in the middle of the chest. And just notice what starts happening, where it starts happening in the body. And check in for yourself. Where is it? How uncomfortable is this discomfort right now on the scale? And then see if for the next 10 seconds, you can hold it as is. Not changing it, not making it better, not doing anything. Just holding the discomfort as is. And now putting the hand that you use the most on that area, wherever you were sensing this emotion. And now as you breathe in, allow it to move. allow this emotion to move where it wants. And as you breathe out from the mouth, allowing it to leave. Whew. And then again, as you breathe in, giving it space to move, and you breathe out, letting it leave. Whew. Maybe now bringing back the emotion that we began with, the love that you felt in the body. If you can put your hand in that area where you had felt love, put your hand there. And as you breathe in, let that energy come back to you. And as you breathe out, let that energy go deeper. So you breathe in, allowing the energy of the love to come in. And you breathe out, letting it go deeper. Bring your awareness back to the contact between your seat and the seat below. Feel into your seat bones, feel your weight into the seat bones. And then if you are in such a, if you are able to put your hands, palms facing down on your knees. And then slightly, gently push your hands on the knees and turn your chin towards your chest such that you are facing your own body. And then when you feel ready, slowly open your eyes and smile to your body, not to anybody else, just to your own body. And then when you feel ready, come back to the space. All right. It would be helpful to know what happened for you through this practice. In fact, I think if somebody's keen, you can also unmute yourself and share what happened for you through the practice.
I can share. My name is Johnny, she, her pronouns.
Hi, Johnny.
I was suddenly very aware of a lot of body sensations, reminding me also just how much of a fast-paced morning I've had. So I was just noticing, I was like, okay, I'm hungry and this and that. And part of it, I think then it became hard to focus, but I noticed when you were talking about the image and the love, I was really surprised that like nobody I knew came to mind immediately. For some reason, I thought of like a panda. I don't know why, but I thought that was interesting, that it was just, you know, something I don't usually think about. And I think also maybe speaks to sort of like my overwhelm of like sometimes community relationships too, wanting to escape. And I was having trouble trying to identify the sensations I felt when you said, where do you feel the love? And I think part of it was like, I was so distracted by everything I was feeling in my body that I was trying to make sense of it. But then when you talked about the difficult emotion, immediately I felt a pain kind of like here. And for those that can't see, like on my upper right chest, under my shoulder. And it was really powerful to notice, just even if I couldn't make sense of it in words or even make sense of it in my mind, like I could feel it starting to subside. When you talked about like kind of like breathing it in and then exhaling it and trying to focus on the, I was guessing that the love emotion was by my stomach, but I don't actually know. That's a little bit about my experience. I really appreciated.
Thank you.
It's so differently than the typical stereotypical spaces in the US, I should say.
Thank you, Chandni. And you've mentioned something very interesting. You spoke about how the happiness you were not able to sense, but the difficult emotion you immediately sensed, right? And which talks to the negativity bias orientation of the mind, and which is also associated with threat response, which is associated with evolutionary life and death response, right? So yeah, and in the training, or as you train in these various skills, what you start developing are these subtle nuances to be able to feel into the happiness and all other emotions and not just the difficult ones, which then again start shifting perspective of realizing that it's not just these heavy emotions that are there, but also all of these other emotions that exist. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Diksha, okay, so a number of people have shared a few things. Thank you for leading us through a practice that included loving meditation, loving kindness meditation. I definitely noticed, so Christoph says he definitely noticed fluid motion around his body, and then later that fluidity of joining the distressful memory, it felt more whole, which was centering, calming, and inspiring. Yeah, I loved embodied emotion and healing it, working through it, holding it. What can't be in the mind can maybe be healed by the body, in the body. Yes. Yeah. And so the practices that the one practice that we just did included 3 pieces. And these 3 pieces were grounding. So grounding is the one skill that enables me to feel safe in me. And interestingly, the only place that will ever make me feel truly safe is when I feel safe in me. Until I feel that, I can keep looking for safety in the outside and there'll always be something missing. So grounding quickly helps us feel okay, feel safe. And even if somebody is not immersed in these practices, by focusing on the seat, there'll be a certain sense of, it's okay, I'm fine, I'm okay. A certain sense of calmness is going to come. Thereafter, what I think Diksha is referring to as loving meditation, loving kindness meditation. I think it's Diksha. Yeah, so Diksha is mentioning the loving kindness meditation. What we did, we brought in a person, that person or a thing, any object of love. And then you see, it was important for us to say, let the object of love go and stay with the emotion and the sensation of love, because then that is your resource. The emotion, the sensation that's in your own being, that's the resource. And then from there, we went to practicing some form of emotional resilience. The idea here is from Tantra. This is a tantric practice wherein you say that you allow the emotion to come in. And of course, this was, a taster of the full practice. But what we basically do in the practice is we allow the emotion to take over. But you can't allow the emotion to take over unless you have the first 2, which is grounding and resourcing. So you allow the emotion to take over, feel it, sense it, and then practice first with holding it, which is where the resilience is built. And then you let it go, because you don't want to carry along, you don't want to go along your day carrying that emotion. You want to practice and build capacity to be able to hold it for longer duration if and when it comes. But that doesn't mean you need to torture yourself and go along with it and have it throughout the day. Yeah. Thus, all 3 play together. You ground, you resource, so that you can build your emotional resilience. And once you've practiced holding, then you again ground and resource and let go. All right. So such practices are coming from the philosophies of yoga, Tantra, certain sects of Buddhism, of Buddha's teachings, where Buddha's teachings focus a lot on the view, saying suffering to happiness, saying it's important to see the view, the path, saying that it is the attachment that needs to be worked on with the help of equanimity. So bringing all of these practices together, in last year, October, I'd facilitated a meditation workshop for 21 consistent days. And I mainly work with South Asian women. And I just want to share with you a few of their reflections. This is what one says. She says, wanted to share gratitude for this practice. Through the day, I have been able to observe my emotions, my body, and have been able to manage stress so much better. I want to express my gratitude that there is a sense of comfort coming to the idea I am okay with wherever I am. It gives me courage to stay and get ready to advance forward. And next, these days have given me a direction towards healing myself and have shown me where I lack and how to move forward. Now, say two things to note across these three. One, there is deep connection with the body, with the emotions, with the understanding of the self. Two, there is an okayness with whatever is. There is an okayness to be able to see what is there, what is lacking, with no judgment. If there was judgment, then the readiness would not have been there to move forward, to advance. Yeah. Then a few more. This person says, this experience has been profound. It has helped me understand my body, my mind, and the crucial connection between the two, helping me treat myself with more kindness, to really listen what my emotions are asking of me, how they are expressing themselves in my body. And so when Chandni shared that it was difficult to really tap into the sensations, it is because tapping into the sensations is a skill. So until now, what we were reading, these reflections were from the 21-day meditation. And then again, bringing various ancient practices together and stitching them together in a framework. There is a program that I conduct, and somebody from that program says, I'm learning how by being present in my body, I can feel safe. This allows me to look at my fears and be able to understand where they are coming from, how not to drown in them, but be able to hold them and let them pass and allow myself to heal. The next one is from somebody who, in their own words, has gone through 14 different therapy practitioners. And now she says, I broke through the helplessness pattern. I feel completely different now. I don't know how to describe it. This is the non-conceptual piece of it, which is why she's unable to describe it. It feels like I successfully reframed the way I looked at my past. And one last story that I want to share is of a before and after. 31-year-old female, married, mother of one, and let's say her name is A. So when she came into the program, this is where she was. She said, whenever something happens, especially related to my son, I become stressed, unable to think about or concentrate on anything else. It's just him on my mind. I get stuck in these repetitive thoughts, going back and forth, struggling to make decisions because I'm too scared of going wrong. Further went on to say, if health is fine, then various other things. And she sort of listed a priority, from being able to guide and discipline him in a calm and gentle manner, to modeling things that she wants him to learn. Then apart from her son, then also these other things come, staying away from parents, the anxiety regarding their health, not being there for them, her relationship with her extended family members, her career growth. And then she says, if one factor is okay, the mind takes on the next big thing. This is where she was 6 weeks before. And 6 weeks after, here's what she herself shared with me. She says, life goes in a spiral like the DNA spiral. It is circular. The circular path shifts up and down at the axis, and it also continuously keeps going up. By its nature, life will move forward, I will grow. It might seem like I'm going round and round. It might also seem like I go up and down. But overall, in the big picture, the spiral is progressing upwards. And just FYI, to be able to talk in metaphors is a much higher level skill. Yeah, and she's defined life in metaphor. Would love to hear what comes up for you when you read this.
When I read this, I start thinking about, it's not, I think that we are being pushed in our internal senses to push us towards upward growth. And life pushes us towards upward growth. I don't know that we're always able to respond to that. And so sometimes we do get stuck. Sometimes we do regress. The ultimate push is towards the upward growth. So that's what I almost like find myself disagreeing with this statement, because I work in spaces where I work to combat discrimination, and I look at the perpetrators of discrimination. I feel compassion for them, but also I'm thinking like, y'all don't quite have it right. You're not quite moving upwards right now. Eventually, yes, but right now, no.
Yeah, I guess that's why she also says it might seem like going round and round. It might go up and down. All of these are mights. Okay, so let's move towards the last bit, which is, so all of these reflections that I've shared with you are coming from the base of the framework that I tend to use. And this framework is inspired by the philosophies, the yogic philosophy, the tantric philosophy. They take into consideration two main principles. So two underlying principles, one saying that there are three core needs. Every single thing that you and I do are to meet these three core needs: safety, connection, and growth. Interestingly, in my practice, this started coming to me. I started finding these connections where I said, oh, okay, everything we do is for these three needs. And later I found out that there is a gentleman who has proposed this need model with these three needs. But I guess in my experience, it went these three needs plus a fact. And this fact is that, yes, everything we do is for to meet these three core needs. But the secret is that these three core needs are not unmet. They're already met. We have forgotten to connect with it. And since we are not connected with it, it seems as if they are unmet. And so we keep looking around and doing things that we do to meet them. That's one core principle. And the second core principle is directly from Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga principles, taking the four aspects of the being: the body, the mind, the emotions, and the beyond. My understanding is that we need to touch upon each of these four, keeping in mind that these three core needs, once you're connected to this, then the work on all four happens much more easily. And so taking these two principles together, how I work with people is this: I work with them through a three-stepped model: connect, heal, grow. In the space of connect, what we do is we begin the work with really understanding the body at the gross and the subtle levels. So we bring in together yogic tantric practices, practicing into sensations, into energies, chakras, all of that work. Once that starts happening, we start connecting to our own safety. The moment you start connecting to your own self-safety, connection begins to happen, because now I'm connected to myself, so I feel the connection. When I'm safe and I feel the connection, I can see that I'm learning, and as I'm learning, as I'm seeing more and more, automatically I'm growing. Interestingly, if you think about a therapeutic setting, not the word good, a well-skilled therapist will hold a space where all these three are being met. A skilled therapist will ensure that the person feels safe. They will create a rapport which creates connection. And then through the session or through the series of sessions, the person will learn, explore, have insights, they will grow. Yeah. So in the first step of connect, the idea is that once these three are met, now the person has the space within to start the second step of healing. And then this is where I personally work with internal family systems and attachment theory. And so I bring in those, and I do minimum holding the space, because in the first step, they have already created those things for them. As they were working in the first step, they were working on the body. As they were working on the body, their mental models were shifting for the mind. As they were working on the body, their emotional tolerance was increasing. As they were working on the body from gross to subtle, they were going beyond the concepts into the non-conceptual. Yeah. So by the time they come to the heal space, the second step of healing, they're in a good space to hold space for themselves. There is still guidance needed, which is where I come in. And then once they start the healing process, where they see where their core wounds are coming from, what kind of stories they've been living, what kind of beliefs they've been enmeshed in, then they start getting ready for the third step, which is grow, which is to say, beyond you now. Go beyond you, because at the end of the day, we are social animals, we live with other people. And so once I have understood or started to see my stories and my beliefs and my core wounds, can I now start seeing others? The other one person closest to me, my closest circle, and then beyond in the world. Can I then start seeing from my individual suffering to the collective suffering, or the term now very famously being used is the collective trauma? Yeah. So that's the framework. And just to conclude, I hope you've sort of been able to get a sense of the ancient spiritual practice perspectives we looked at, were yoga, tantra, non-duality. Then we also saw a few gaps in my understanding in the prevailing theoretical approaches. We then experienced and debriefed grounding, resourcing, emotional resilience practices. And then finally, I shared this therapeutic approach with you. I want to close the loop of when I said the disclaimer is that this is not typical research orientation based. I want to close that loop with a story. And the story it's mostly based on facts. So I began my foray into the space of spirituality properly began with this 10-day meditation course called Vipassana. Vipassana is taught in different traditions in different ways. The one that I learned was from, back then, the one that I learned was from S.N. Goenka. And Mr. Goenka, in his teachings, he uses a lot of stories. So anecdotes and stories. And so one such anecdote he was sharing was that Buddha, back in BC, the exact date of Buddha's time period is debated upon, but everybody agrees it was in BC. And he says that back then itself, Buddha had found the subatomic reality. He says that at that time in the Indian civilization, there was the fundamental particle was referred to as a kalapa, which we normally use the term atom. So back then in the Indian civilization, they called an atom a kalapa. But the Buddha went on further and he discovered that within the kalapa, there is still something finer, and he called it Ashtakalapa. Ash means 8 kalapas, which he said were even more elementary level of reality. Then he further went on to describe, and he said that subatomic ashtakalapas constantly transform, appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing trillions of times in the blink of an eye. This was Buddha in the BC. Fast forward to 1960, and he said that there was an American physicist who was awarded the Nobel Prize because he invented a bubble chamber that was able to isolate subatomic events. And what this gentleman discovered is that the subatomic particle arises and vanishes, appears, disappears, appears, disappears. 10 squared 22 times in 1 second, trillions of times in the blink of an eye. And the story doesn't finish here. You see, in the 1960s, Mr. Goenka says that it just so happened when this gentleman was awarded the Nobel Prize, a few of Mr. Goenka's students who had practiced Vipassana with him were there in the same area, and they were very curious. They said, this man has found the exact same truth that this enlightened person found back then. What treasures he must carry. And so they went to meet this American physicist. And now here, the story, now here you can question the story. Until now, it's all facts. Here you can question, because it seems that his students told Mr. Goenka that they were a little surprised to see that this Nobel Prize awardee who had discovered the finest truth, finest reality, was actually a relatively unhappy man drowned in the human misery. And so from here, closing the loop of my orientation, research, I don't have anything against research. I believe that's not my orientation, but I believe research has given us a lot. It continues to give us a lot. However, as they say, Buddha used to say, unless you become the scientist of the inner world, the researcher of the inner world, the outside will remain in the outside. All right. Thank you so much for being here and for listening through. I don't know if we don't really have time, but yeah, Maha, I don't know if you're there, and I don't know, you can now take it forward from here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We are out of time, but I don't know if you have any contact information that maybe you would feel comfortable sharing, like an email in the chat. So if folks do have follow-up questions or thoughts, they can contact you.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm just going to put my email ID here.
Thank you. And I dropped it in the chat as well, but if any folks are here for CE credit, just make sure you sign out as well. And I've dropped the link in the chat there. And thanks for everyone's patience with the chat issues earlier, but this was an absolutely wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Shivali.
Thank you, Maha. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye, Shivali.
Bye.